Hello, everyone. I am Tiana Starks, the Director of Communications at We the People of Detroit. Thanks so much for being here this World Water Day. We're excited to continue the discussion on the importance of access to clean, safe, and affordable water in our communities. Today, you're going to hear from local, regional, and national water advocates, activists, and policymakers on how we can all work together to ensure a future where no one has to wonder if they'll have access to safe drinking water in their homes. Thanks in advance to our dynamic presenters and panelists. To get us started, I would like to introduce none other than the water warrior herself, Monica Lewis Patrick, our president and CEO. Monica is an educator, entrepreneur, and human rights activist. She's known as the water warrior. Lewis Patrick is actively engaged in the struggle to access safe, affordable water for all under-resourced communities. In 2022, Lewis Patrick joined the University of Waterloo as a Jarislowsky Fellow. She has also received the honor of being selected as a Michigan State University Water Fellow and Ron McNair Scholar. Lewis Patrick, or Monica, Mama Monica, as we lovingly call her, also serves as a member of several organizations and committees the advancement of water, including the National Water Affordability Table, All About Water, Freshwater Future Subcommittee, Policy Link Water Energy Resource Caucus, or WORK, and the Michigan Water Unity Table, and Water Poverty and Healing Our Waters, Equity, Advocacy, and Action Committee. Take it away, Monica.
Thank you so much, Tiana. And let me just say, what an amazing job that you and Taylor Pine have done in bringing us all together for this historic day, World Water Day 2023. And I can't think of a better place to be than with all of you here with We the People of Detroit. We have an amazing lineup of experts, as Tiana said, from local to state to regional and national. And so without any further ado, we're going to move right into the conversation. The next speakers that we have are two amazing leaders, not only here in Detroit, but at the state level, and also have weighed in at the national level. We have the GOAT, none other than Cecily McClellan. Cecily McClellan is a co-founder of We the People of Detroit. She is our go-to on all things water affordability at We the People of Detroit. She's been a critical part of not only creating influence and information that has been critical for moving water affordability on a fast pace here in the community of Detroit, the city of Detroit, but she's also been a critical voice in helping us understand the nuancing and the strategic concepts that must be in the concept of moving water affordability at this particular point in time. We also have with us Noriel Hemphill, who is a National Environmental Justice Legal Fellow. Noriel serves with the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center. She's also was the first We the People of Detroit legal intern. And so we're excited about the work that they're doing with Water Peeps, which is our local coalition, and also leading in a significant way to ensure that these human rights are codified at the local level. So at this time, the next voices you will hear are that of none other than co-founder and We the People of Detroit's Waterworks Director, Cecily McClellan, and the great environmental law leader, Noriel Hemphill.
Good evening. Welcome to World Water Day. We the People of Detroit has been promoting, organizing, and just plain fighting collectively with our partners and organizations for clean, safe, and affordable water. We stand on the shoulders of some courageous women politicians and activists like the Honorable Marianne Mahaffey and Charity Hicks, who are now ancestors, and the Honorable Joanne Watson If not for these women, we would not be where we are today in water affordability. Charity Hicks was a tireless social and water activist and one of the founders of the People's Water Board, who unfortunately died in 2014 due to a hit and run accident in New York. In 2003, Detroit had documented over 40,000 water shutoffs. The Honorable Mary Ann Mahaffey and Joanne Watson and the Welfare Rights Organization were the force that initiated a contract for water affordability with the water expert, Roger Colton. In 2005, a plan for water affordability was presented to the Detroit City Council and the DWSD, the Water Department. With the passing of the Honorable Mary Ann Mahaffey in 2006, Councilwoman Joanne Watson continued the fight for water affordability. And in 2007, through her efforts, the first attempt at a water affordability program was created by DWSD and the city's Department of Human Services. I had the fortunate opportunity to implement the Detroit Residential Water Assistance Program for the city's Department of Human Services at the Eastside Pavement Center. The city of Detroit provided these services throughout the city through the Department of Human Service. The program was a low-income program up to 200% of poverty and limited enrollment for 2 years. And all the residents had an individual fixed billing rate and paying up to $3,000 over the 2-year period. Thousands of Detroiters enrolled in the program, but the program was terminated with the closing of the city's federally funded Department of Human Services in 2012 by Mayor Dave Bean. This was also during the time that the water department was transferring delinquent water bills twice a year to property tax rolls and increasing the number of homes going into foreclosure. Almost 12,000 homes were foreclosed in 2006, had water bills attached and was the major cause for the foreclosure. Many Detroiters fought against the acceleration of the water department's shutoff practices and demanded affordable rates. Shutoff rates accelerated even more after the bankruptcy, as though to prove to the emergency manager that the water department could manage the system by largely shutting off low and moderate income residents. Over 100,000 residents were shut off during 2013 through 2017. In July of 2014, a group of protesters called the Homrich Nine laid down in front of the Homrich trucks contracted to shut off water in the city of Detroit and were arrested. Later, in August of 2014, a major protest occurred that involved local and national organizations, Netroots and the National Nursing Association. Thousands of protesters descended on downtown Detroit to protest Detroit's water shutoffs. And in October of 2014, UN rapporteur visited Detroit and stated Detroit's water department shutoff practices violated basic human rights and falls heaviest on the poor, and particularly the African-American population in Detroit. The University of Michigan study conducted in 1980 to 2018 determined that Michigan water rates increased by 100%. Detroit's water rates increased by 285%, Flint's over 320%. These are conservative figures. The director of the water department indicated that water rates had increased over 400% in 2020 to a local news outlet. And just recently, Great Lakes Echo reported in February, Detroit water rates increased over 407%. These rates are not sustainable for low or moderate income and are truly a burden on the population. It took COVID pandemic of 2020 for the state of Michigan and Detroit to place a moratorium on water shutoffs. Mind you, several years before, Henry Ford did a study that determined through emergency room visits that higher incidence of hepatitis A occurred in areas with large numbers of shutoffs. Detroit faces another shutoff crisis with the end of the moratorium on shutoffs December 31st, 2022. Over 60,000 residents face shutoff. The Detroit Lifeline is a water department assistance program implemented in 2022, which is a step in the right direction. Attorney Norrell Hemphill will discuss this program. Take it away.
Thank you, Ms. McClellan. Throughout my fellowship, I have been focused on codifying the human right to water to ensure that Detroiters have access to clean, safe, and affordable water. For almost a year, I've been working in coalition with We the People of Detroit on the Detroit Water and Sewage Department's Detroit Lifeline Plan. The Detroit Lifeline Plan is a water assistance plan for low-income Detroiters, which gives residents at or below 200% of the federal poverty level an income-based tiered water bill, as long as they stay within their usage limitations for the month. The plan was announced in June and launched August 1st, 2022. Some of the key benefits of the plan are that it wipes away all existing arrears for enrolled residents. It provides an income-based discounted rate to low-income residents. It also provides shutoff protections while applying and when enrolled in the program, which is really important right now as the COVID-19 driven shutoff protections have been lifted, as Ms. Cecily said earlier. However, when the plan was launched, there were many issues. There was no true community engagement before the plan was announced and implemented. The plan details and funding source was not made publicly available. Water usage was woefully lower than the national average, and early on, enrollment was challenging because of past harms and a lack of transparency, which yielded a lack of trust. Over the past year, we've managed to get DWSD to strengthen the program by changing the name of the program from an affordability plan to an assistance plan to reflect its true nature, implementing a public comment period for the first 45 days of the plan, implementing a customer service process, enlisting the help of the ombudsman, who dedicated 3 attorneys within his office to help with unresolved customer issues, creating an online dashboard that gives updated enrollment data, allowing Wayne Metro to have access to customer accounts to acknowledge that a customer has applied to the Detroit Lifeline Plan, and lastly, providing shutoff protections when residents apply to the Lifeline Plan. There are still many improvements that are needed, such as a permanent moratorium on shutoffs for low-income residents, acknowledgement of past harms, a hardship process for residents, a permanent funding source, daily and monthly usage that is at least equal to the national average, and disaggregated data for residential customers. The Lifeline plan continues to be strengthened and transformed because of community engagement. It was Detroit residents who went to the Board of Water Commissioners meetings month after month to explain how the plan wasn't working for them, to express the need for more protections, and to demand real change. We must use the full power and authority of our voices to demand what we need and deserve. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. It is our hope that this program will turn into a true affordability program with a permanent funding source, which will give low-income Detroit residents an affordable bill and provide dignity in the service delivery of clean, safe, and affordable water. You'll learn throughout the program today that water affordability is not just a Detroit issue. It's a statewide issue and even a national issue. Attorney Jill Ryan will tell you the history of water affordability in the state of Michigan.
Thank you very much, Norrell, and it's great to be here. My name is Jill Ryan. I am the Executive Director of Freshwater Future, and I'm extremely happy that we've been partners with We the People of Detroit for quite a number of years. I want to talk a little bit about how did we get in the position we're in historically in Michigan, and to some extent beyond Michigan. So historically, water service has been was subsidized by the federal government very much, to the extent that at times more than 70% of the costs of our water systems were covered by the federal government. That allowed us to create our systems, create what we needed to develop communities. And with those low rates, we were able to take water for granted, unfortunately. When the rates were low, there were a couple of factors that were created. One was the federal investments in our water infrastructure began to decrease. And we, as ratepayers, we weren't really paying attention to that necessarily. But those investments began to dwindle to the point that they are now down to only about 7%. So from over 70% to now down below 7%. The second factor is that systems began to defer needed maintenance. So we, for a long time, because our water infrastructure is largely out of sight, it was also out of mind. And we deferred that maintenance because of the cost and because people wanted to not have to ask their constituents for increases in rates. That went along for decades and decades. Then that resulted in the situation where, in order to meet safety requirements and other needs of our communities, we saw skyrocketing rates in many communities in recent decades. Detroit and Flint and Benton Harbor, Michigan, but so many others as well. And as toxins are added to our waters for many reasons, usually because they've been spilled or because of a factory, every time we have to take out a new toxin, it costs more to remove it and our rates go up. So there are lots of reasons for our increasing rates, but unfortunately that has now taken us to the point where across the country, it has been estimated that by the last year, about a third of American families would be unable to have affordable water rates. And by affordable, what we mean is no more than a certain percentage of their income has to be spent on their water bill. We now see some households paying far greater than what we would call an affordable water bill. We would like to see water bills at no more than 3 to 3.5% of household income, but we know there are many households, unfortunately, paying 10% and even more. In rural areas, this is also extremely important. And although we often hear that this is a primarily urban issue, that is really far from the truth, because in smaller or rural areas, often systems have many fewer customers. And when you have fewer customers and you need to make an upgrade, remove lead pipes, put in a new water treatment system, those things take great investment. And the fewer customers you have, the higher your rates will have to go to pay off those investments. Also, in many rural communities, we're seeing them find that their private water sources, private wells, have become contaminated at no fault of their own through someone else's activities. And now those folks have to be connected to a public system. That can be extremely expensive in rural areas, creating new infrastructure to deal with those wells that are now contaminated. For all these reasons and more, we really need a statewide solution to assure affordable water. It's critical that we can't continue to kick this can down the road to future generations or allow our most vulnerable to suffer and pay the costs of increased toxins, of old infrastructure, and the resulting public health crises that come from those. Now is the time to put people first in the Great Lakes state and ensure that all have access to clean and affordable water. Thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Taylor Pine.
Thank you so much, Jill. And thanks for the introduction. My name is Taylor Pine, and I'm the marketing assistant here at We the People of Detroit. When planning this event, we really wanted to be sure to uplift community voices and emphasize that water injustice is not a faceless issue. We know that the average cost of water across Michigan has increased 188% since 1980 and up to 320% in individual cities. Additionally, water bills for households in the lowest 20th percentile of income have risen 433% on average since 1986. To speak more on this issue, we invited Sonia Bonnet, a mother and community advocate who will share her personal experience dealing with water insecurity. Sonia is a 38-year-old wife and mother of 6. She is a lifelong Detroiter, born and raised on the Southwest Side, committed to working to restore justice to the poor and disenfranchised community that has been illegally and unconstitutionally preyed upon. Unfortunately, Sonia is unable to be here today due to a family emergency, but in lieu of her absence, we will be playing a short video of a speech that she gave at our Mothers of the Movement event, where she discussed her experience dealing with water insecurity.
I, again, am here today as not just an advocate, but as a mother who has been in the position of having to watch my children wash up from hose water and bottled water because I could not afford to keep that high-ass water bill. I am here to ask the water company, the city of Detroit, the organizations that work here, the press, everybody, to stand with us and make sure that this 85% Black city does not leave families without water. Water is a human right. It is your right. It is my right. And it should be affordable. And it should not be a burden on poor Black and brown people in this city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cecily, Narelle, Jill, and Taylor. And let's all keep Sister Sonia in our prayers as she deals with her family emergency. And also, let's always remember, as she demonstrated in that video that we just watched, that there are people and names and faces behind the statistics that we hear around water insecurity. And we must continue to advocate for everyone's human right to water. As Mama Monica always says, quoting the Honorable Coleman Young, when you see a good fight, get in it. And that is why we are here today. And now we will hear from our Michigan State Senator, Stephanie Chang.
Hi everyone, happy World Water Day. My name is Stephanie Chang and I'm the state senator for Senate District 3, which includes a portion of Wayne County as well as Oakland and Macomb County. And I'm really excited about the opportunity that we finally have to address water affordability at the state level. When I first ran for office back in 2014, water affordability was something that I continued to hear from residents about. As we all know, there were many water shutoffs that were happening in Detroit that year. And thinking back to 2015, my first year in office, was so proud to work with a number of folks to put together a hearing at the Capitol to listen to people's testimonies from Detroit and Highland Park and Flint and across the state around the need for to address water shutoffs, to address the need for clean water and the need for water affordability. And so ever since then, I've been working really hard on a number of bills along with my colleagues and working with so many different groups to advocate for a set of proposals that would ensure that we have water affordability programs across the state, that we address water shutoffs, and that we have more transparency about how water utilities are setting their rates where shutoffs may be occurring, and also to decriminalize the reconnections of water for those who are simply doing that so that they can live. Because we all know that water affordability is continuing to grow as an issue. Study after study shows that, increasingly as water rates go up, they become a larger percentage of many household expenses. And when household incomes are not necessarily going up, that's a huge problem. And so we've got to tackle it, and we've got to tackle it head on. I'm very excited about the fact that we have a different makeup of the legislature at the state level here in Michigan now. And so with that, it comes, an amazing, amazing opportunity to finally pass water affordability legislation. So I'm really proud to be working with We the People and a lot of other organizations, including water advocates, environmental advocates, water utilities themselves, municipalities, to say, let's come together, build some consensus around common sense water affordability legislation that recognizes the important work that locals have been doing to institute new water affordability programs, and also recognize that we need a state level function as well to provide assistance, or for some of the communities that are just too small to be able to create their own program, for the state to be able to help them out. So I'm really excited about the work that we are currently underway with, along with many of you probably who are watching tonight, to really, really finally get something done at the state level around water affordability. We are the Great Lakes state. We are surrounded by fresh water. There is no reason why Michigan can't be the leader in this country when it comes to ensuring safe and affordable water for every single Michigander, no matter how much money you have or where you live in the state. So just really, really proud to continue this work, especially today, recognizing that it's World Water Day, that we are a country where it should not be a question of whether or not someone has access to safe and affordable drinking water. And we know that across this whole world, we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that that everyone has that same access. But we can start by tackling this issue right here in Michigan. So thank you for participating in this event tonight. Thank you to all of the amazing organizers who put this event together. And happy World Water Day. We're going to get this done.
We are so grateful that the senator took time to share her thoughts with us. And later on, we'll have a chance to hear from U.S. Representative Rashida Tlaib at the end of our webinar. But now we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Flow Fund initiative, which is a project that has allowed We the People of Detroit to award 5 Michigan-based water warriors, activists, and environmental justice advocates with $5,000 each to support their continued work. The Flow Fund is near and dear to my colleague and co-moderator, as she serves as the chair of the board for River Network, which coordinated with other community leaders and organizations to make these funds available. So as we get ready to move into our panel discussion, I would like to take this opportunity to big up and introduce my co-moderator, Jumana Vasi, who is the National Policy and Fund Development Consultant with We the People of Detroit. Hi, Jumana.
Hi, Tiana. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to co-moderate this exceptional panel. Before we jump in, I wanted to invite everyone to make sure to use the chat function to offer any questions. Teresa, thank you for weighing in with that first question. I wish I could see all of your lovely faces, but since we can't, please weigh in the chat so we can keep a conversation going. My first job today is to introduce our esteemed and revered panelists. So it would take more time than we have if I were to list their long, illustrative set of achievements. So I'm only going to mention their names and titles today, but I hope if you have a chance, you can look them up because this is an amazing group of. So first, we'll be hearing from my friend Andy Bucksbaum, attorney for the National Wildlife Federation and lecturer at the University of Michigan's Law School. And as in kindergarten, we will refer to Andy Bucksbaum as Andy B because we have a second Andy, Andy Cricken, who is managing director of Moonshot Missions and senior fellow at the U.S. Water Alliance. We will also have a chance to hear from the amazing Mary Grant, who is the Public Water for All director at the national nonprofit Food and Water Watch. And last but not least, we have our very own beloved and adored Victoria Lu, policy manager at We the People of Detroit. So I think I've done my job and I'm going to hand it back to you. But everyone remember, please use the chat function. Let us know what you're thinking and let us know your questions. Tiana, you are on mute, my friend.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I am ready to get started. And I would like to start with you, Mary. As the Public Water for All Director at Food and Water Watch, you've been involved in the implementation of various water affordability programs, notably in Baltimore. What challenges did you face in the implementation of that program?
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to join this excellent panel on such an important topic. And that's a great question. We faced several challenges in implementation in Baltimore. I'm going to mention 3 of them. The first one was political, right? Our former mayor, used his emergency powers due to the pandemic emergency to suspend the start date. He claimed that the pandemic made it too onerous and burdensome to set up the program. But the program was especially urgent because of the pandemic, when unemployment skyrocketed and people needed affordable water to stay safe at home, wash their hands, and just be safe. But fortunately, the people spoke and held him accountable. Baltimore elected a new mayor who had been our champion on city council, and he committed to a new timeline to get back on track, and the program finally launched in February of 2022. The second issue was technical, the tax treatment of the affordability support for tenants. Tenants are so often left out of water affordability and assistance programs, especially folks who live in multifamily units who are behind a central meter and not a direct customer of the utility. In Baltimore, most people rent their homes, and renters are disproportionately low income and Black residents of the city. So it was really important for the Baltimore Right to Water Coalition and for racial and economic equity to reach tenants. We also didn't want landlords to just pocket the affordability credit. So we in the coalition worked with the city on an equitable solution. It was prepaid cards to cover the unaffordable portion of a tenant's water costs. Unfortunately, the city received outside legal advice that this support would count as income and had been issuing 1099s, which could have cascading impacts on a household's access to other income qualified assistance programs like housing and food assistance. But the really good news is that just last month, a solution was found, thanks to Senator Van Hollen, who sought IRS guidance that clarified that this assistance affordability support is not counted as taxable income. This removes a big barrier and allows hundreds, if not thousands, of tenants to get access to affordable water billing. And this solution will apply nationally. No water affordability support to an income qualified household will count as income for tax purposes. The third and remaining issue is staffing for enrollment. This is our current challenge. Like many utilities, Baltimore faces a severe staffing shortfall. And this is impacting the customer action centers that are doing the intake for the affordability program. The good news is that they're hiring for several positions right now, and if they can get fully staffed, up, they should be able to work through the backlog on applications.
Thanks, Mary. That was very informative, and thanks for providing a overview of how the program is performing currently or running currently. I'd like to dig into a little bit of the details about when you guys first began this journey. Like, what were some of the data and reports that were analyzed to decide the metrics that you use to determine the success for your program?
We relied on the expertise of utility affordability expert Roger Colton, who designed the Detroit program nearly 2 decades ago, as Ms. Cicely talked about earlier. So Roger wrote 2 reports for the Baltimore Right to Water Coalition. The first one was a 100+ page, like a huge report analyzing data from the city using census tract information to document the scope of the city's water affordability crisis and to propose a model for the legislation. He also then later on wrote a fiscal analysis of the program, showing that the program would be fiscally responsible. I do want to note that early on in this effort, we worked with our state senator, Mary Washington, to request data from the Department of Public Works about 5 years ago to help Roger and his analysis. But under the former DPW director, most of that data was not provided. The city indicated that they didn't have some pretty basic metrics. But that lack of data, in fact, informed the legislation too. A big piece of the Water Accountability and Equity Act that was passed in Baltimore is a customer advocate's office to address billing issue. This new customer advocate is also responsible for compiling data to monitor the performance of the water affordability program and to collect other basic metrics. And I have to say that we have gotten some really good information about the affordability program from the new customer advocate, Mr. Mills, and the equity head, Director Merrick. There is a whole dashboard about enrollment figures, and they give us biweekly updates on it. It's been a wonderful partnership and a true change in tone for the department.
Mary, thank you so much. That was really helpful to hear those details. So I'm going to turn our next question to Andy Kay. But before that, I did want to address one of the questions that came up in the chat. Unfortunately, this webinar does not allow us to use the chat function for people to talk to each other. So we do need to use the Q&A. And I think I said chat earlier, but it is the Q&A functionality that's open to everybody. So feel free to weigh in using that and not the chat. If you chat, I think only the panelists can see. So please use the Q&A. It doesn't have to be a question. You can offer a comment or reflection as well. But thank you for that. Okay, Andy Kay, back to you. I'd like to hear your thoughts on city water affordability problems or municipal water affordability problems. As the former executive director and chief engineer of Camden County Municipal Utilities Authority, what strategies were you able to implement to lower costs for residents, and what could be replicable here in Michigan?
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, many thanks to We the People of Detroit and your partners for inviting me to be part of this panel. Terrific panelists and terrific speakers beforehand, and I've just been a tremendous fan of the work of We the People of Detroit, and especially my friend Monica Lewis Patrick. So anyway, thank you very much for this opportunity. So yes, I worked for many years as the head of the Camden County Municipal Utilities Authority, which is probably analogous to the Great Lakes Water Authority. It was a regional authority that was located in the host community of Camden City, which is a very economically distressed community. Camden, New Jersey has a median household income of about $26,000 per year. So it's similar to, I think, like Benton Harbor, which is in the low to mid 20s as well. And then had regional suburban communities also connecting in. So the kind of strategies I described, could be, I think, replicated by regional authorities like the Great Lakes Water Authority and in general. So the first thing is I would say is that it's important to shrink the overall cost pie that a water utility has to deal with. And to do that, I think there were 2 main strategies. One, just internal optimization and trying to be as efficient as possible. That sort of goes without saying, but also securing outside funding. And at the time, all that was available I served as the chief engineer and then the executive director of this authority from 1996 to 2020. during that period of time, the only thing that was available were low interest loans from the state revolving fund. But still the outcomes were quite good, as you'll hear. Whereas now there's actually federal grant money available and principal forgiveness for loans. So there's more funding available than during the period I'm about to describe. But by strategically using this outside funding to improve and upgrade the system, we were able to hold our rate for almost 24 years. Specifically, when I started in 1996, our rate was $337 countywide, including the city of Camden. And when I left in 2020, it was $352. So it only went up 4% total in 24 years by internal efficiencies and also getting a lot of outside funding to lower the cost. So shrinking that overall cost pie. And then the second thing was to divide the pie as fairly as possible. First, get it as small as possible, which helps everybody, and then try to divide the pie as equitably as possible. And I was very cognizant of the fact that, whereas the national median household income was $65,000, Camden was $26,000. So there's no way you could say that a rate increase across the board would be equitable, because it would affect low-income households more than it would, a more affluent household or more affluent community. So it took three approaches. One is we looked for opportunities to spread costs across the region to the maximum extent possible, as opposed to trying to put costs on the city. So where there was intersections, where there were things that benefited both the city and the county, and the county tried to take those costs, to take them away from the city and spread them out over the larger customer base and the more affluent customer base. And that made a big difference for the city of Camden. Also, we tried to provide in-kind services to the city, things that didn't cost money necessarily, but, for example, shared services, applying for funding on behalf of the city, bidding things out together to get economies of scale so that it would be lower costs. There were a number of things like that. But probably the most important thing, the thing that I think could be applicable to the Great Lakes Water Authority and the city of Detroit, was we implemented a host community benefit. So I mentioned that our rate only went up to $352 from $337, but we were able to reduce Camden's rate by 40% and only charge them $220, because they were the host of the wastewater treatment plant. And there was equity in that, because they're hosting all the burdens that come with the wastewater treatment plant. But also, why should they have to pay for the cost of having to bring the sewage into the city and treat it there? I mean, the cost from the suburbs into the city. Why should they pay for the operations, maintenance, and debt service costs associated with bringing flows from suburban towns into their city and adding to their burden, like odors and truck traffic, etc.? So I was able to show that the costs associated with those transmission lines were about 40% of the total budget. So Camden only pays 60% of the costs of the authority. So while the suburbs pay $352, the city pays $220, because they host the wastewater treatment plant and because they don't benefit from the transmission lines from the suburbs into the city. And I think that is really replicable. And I will say that it is not as the New Jersey residents are enlightened, but when I explained it that way to the suburban people and to the policymakers, they were able to see that it was absolutely equitable to do that. So I think those things could be replicated in Camden. And again, to summarize, it's internal efficiencies and outside funding to lower the total cost to all ratepayers, and then looking for equitable ways to make sure that the host community only pays what it truly ought to pay. And the bottom line for any water utility manager is a sense of intentionality, that you're serving as an anchor institution to benefit the residents that you're serving. And if you come at everything that you do from that lens, you'll find ways to widen your lane to reduce the burden on the host community, which it was in the case of Camden, and like Detroit, was an environmental justice community. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy K. I feel like I have at least 1,001 questions I'd love to dig deeper on, but I know we're going to hold them so that we can have more interaction after. So I'm going to turn to Andy B now. And Andy, I saw you nodding as Andy K was talking. So if you have any follow-up comments or questions, feel free to wrap them in. But my question to you is, based on your decades of experience in the legal field and on successfully moving water policy at the state level, how should we be thinking about using the law to push forward equitable water affordability solutions?
Giovanna, thanks for the question, and thanks to everybody. This is to you and Tiara, and then to Monica Lewis-Patrick, to Cecily McClellan, to Nora Hemphill, Jill Ryan. This is an incredible program that you're all putting on, and we all know that there there should be a human right to safe and affordable water. And we know we don't have that. In Michigan, we don't have it nationally. But thanks to the work of We the People of Detroit and your partners, we're getting closer. And the water affordability work that you're doing at the local and the state and the national levels, that actually creates some rights to affordable water that we otherwise don't have. So you might not call it, you couldn't call it a human right to water yet, but you're chipping away at it and you're making it happen for people on the ground. Also wanted to note Sonia Bonnett's her lived experience is so important, because we're talking about the economics and the law and the policy, but this is happening to people on the ground, happening all the time, and so it's just so important to stay connected. So thanks to her for her courage and for her forcefulness. So back to the question, and that is the role of law. There's already been a great number of legal actions and legal mechanisms that have been put into play, thanks to some of the great people, some of them on this call. If you look at the fight against water shutoffs, Alice Jennings, Mark Fancher have done a phenomenal job in the legal field in terms of litigating to try to get the city of Detroit to stop its terrible water shutoff program. You take a look at the way that the Lifeline program has come together, the way that GLEWA operates, and that's thanks to We the People of Detroit's lobbying efforts, is to the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center. I mean, there's a great amount that's being done. Then you look at Senator Chang. I mean, you heard from her that she's got statewide water legislation she introduced back in 2016, and now she's ready to go again. But we have a special opportunity here, and We the People of Detroit, thanks to you all, we have legislation. We the People of Detroit has legislation, statewide legislation, that we've offered to Senator Chang, and she's looking at it, that tackles income-based rates. It tackles shutoffs, and it tackles arrearages, that is paying for past debts that folks had piled up because they couldn't afford to pay their water bills. That's statewide legislation, and it would mandate that every city in the state, not just Detroit, every city in the state would follow the kinds of procedures that lead to a human right to water. And I'm happy to talk more about that, but it's an incredibly important piece of legislation, and it's just at the beginning of the stages of getting enacted. But yes, that kind of legislation, I think, would really set in motion across the state of Michigan the kind of right to safe and affordable water that we all need.
Thanks, Andy B. That was really insightful and exciting to hear that there is actively legislation being moved forward to, and that senators like Senator Stephanie Chang are taking a look and engaging with community. And to that point, we know that state level solutions also need state level funding. Victoria, as policy manager at We the People of Detroit, a lot of the work that you do is related to the state revolving funds. Can you explain what a state revolving fund is and how these funds are ideal sources for funding for water affordability programs? Also, can you mention some of the historic, pots of water funding in Michigan?
Sure. Well, I want to echo all the thanks and gratitude that was mentioned already, and just also what a humbling experience it is to be on a panel with these three folks here. Thank you very much. So in one very, very simple sentence, the State Revolving Fund is a state administered program funded by both contributions from the federal government and the state that provides low to no interest loans for water and wastewater infrastructure. And that fund is then maintained by the repayment of those loans and any interest. Again, that is an incredibly simplified summary of what it is, but we can certainly share resources on more of the details of it, including an upcoming webinar by our friends at Freshwater Future on April 4th, which we can also share a registration link to. But in terms of water affordability, right, it wouldn't fund a water affordability program in the sense that we're thinking about it tonight. But it does do something very important, and that's investing in our water infrastructure to address exactly the issues that Jill mentioned for us earlier, and something that Andy Kay mentioned earlier about making that cost pie smaller. We combating that sharp decline that we've seen in federal investments in water infrastructure. With this massive addition of funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law into programs like the SRF, we can finally start to get our water infrastructure back in good order, and thereby taking that financial burden back off the customers. But most importantly, in conjunction with initiatives like Justice 40. And these days with a much more focused spotlight on water affordability, not assistance, right? Affordability. But so when we see that working together, we'll see that when we invest in our infrastructure, when we invest in the communities that need it the most, that will ripple out to lasting improvements, like helping bring down those affordable or those unaffordable water rates. And then to answer that last part of your question, I'll just lift up a few additional pieces in that the bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law, also directed quite significant investment into cleaning up and restoring the Great Lakes in areas of concern within the Great Lakes. So addressing contaminants, emerging contaminants like PFAS and algal blooms, things like that. And then in Michigan, there's now $25 million for a statewide water shutoff prevention fund, and then another $40 million in the governor's budget proposal for local water utility affordability that we'll be keeping an eye on. And really in large part to the advocacy of, the amazing people that are here tonight, and for those who are watching now, that conversation around directing funding towards making water affordability is only going to keep growing.
Thank you, Victoria. Andy Kay, we the people of Detroit and our partners commissioned Moonshot Mission's landmark water affordability report. Can you briefly discuss how the recommendations in that report can be baked into statewide policy?
Yes, thanks. And again, thanks to We the People of Detroit and Freshwater Future and the National Wildlife Foundation for funding us and giving us the opportunity to do that study. Basically, we studied 6 representative communities across the state of Michigan: Benton Harbor, East Lansing, Flint, Grand Rapids, Houghton, and Ishpeming. Their median household income range from $22,000 to about $50,000, and again, the national average is 65. So, we chose communities that were low income, with the understanding that if it could work for lower income communities, it certainly could work for more affluent communities too, naturally, because they would have more revenue to spread around. I will say that earlier I described ways to shrink that cost pie, to be more efficient, get outside funding, etc. We did not consider that in this analysis. So what I'm about to describe did not depend on that. So this was just basically taking the budgets that we saw from these 6 communities, and what we saw was that if you just took the existing pie as it was without trying to shrink it, but try to divide it more fairly, more equitably, that in 5 out of the 6 cases, all but Benton Harbor, you could have a one-time, we divided basically all ratepayers into 3 categories: residential below the affordability or poverty line, residential above that line, and then non-residential, commercial and industrial. And what we found was that with a one-time increase of less than 10% to the residential and that were above the affordability threshold, and commercial and industrial, a one-time 10% rate increase would then you would take the revenue there, and then you could reduce that same pot of revenue, that amount of revenue you would generate by that one-time 10% increase. You could then correspondingly reduce the charges to those below the affordability line, and make sure that everyone was paying an affordable rate. So basically, communities could, with a one-time 10% increase to the residential that it could afford and commercial industrial, you could then make sure that everyone was paying an affordable rate without any external assistance. Benton Harbor was the exception. They had the lowest median household income of $22,000. If you think about it, it's like a zero-sum game. You're taking revenue, you're taking more revenue from those who can afford it, and then therefore charging less of those who can't. What that means then is if you have the lower the income, you have more people below the line and fewer people above, so it's more challenging. But for Benton Harbor, it turned out to be just a one-time 13% increase. So you're trying, so, and again, you're 10%, 13%, something like roughly, depending on the rate, something on the order of $50 to $60 a year, one time. And then you wouldn't have to increase it every year. It would be just keeping it at that rate. So it really was reasonable. But then if you factor in, getting outside funding and reducing that overall pie, and also a statewide or national low-income household water assistance program, you really could make it affordable. So the point is even without any of those external assistance factors, it could be done for most communities in a reasonable way. And then again, if you layer in external assistance like federal and state funding, a low-income assistance program, then it is absolutely feasible and possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. So Mary, I think we'll turn back to you, and you shared a lot of very specific details about what you've learned in Baltimore, and I was wondering if you could help highlight the lessons we in Michigan should be particularly paying attention to, and how similar programs in Michigan can be successful.
Excellent question. Thank you. So I think the big thing is real water affordability has to be about meeting people where they're at. It has to be based on individual household income, and it has to reach renting households. We cannot leave anyone behind. Utility directors can sometimes get stuck in their ways and fight change that is necessary to realize this vision. But it is so important to have truly affordable service. We have heard from some folks that utility directors that claim it will hurt bond ratings. It would be too complicated for their billing software to handle, or that it would be too expensive. But the lessons from Baltimore and Philadelphia are that it's not only possible, but it's necessary to help guarantee access for water for all. The state and federal government should provide funding and technical assistance to set up and administer programs. But the issue is not about the workability or the practicability of affordability programs. It's about political will. We need to build the political will by engaging communities and holding elected officials accountable to pass the laws that are necessary to protect people at the local, state, and federal level. And I think there is so much opportunity and hope this year in Michigan. Your legislature just overturned a major anti-worker law to protect the rights of workers for collective bargaining. Victories are being won and change is possible, and the moment is now. And I really want to acknowledge that we looked to Detroit in designing the Baltimore program. There is so much deep knowledge, and from Monica Lewis-Patrick, We the People of Detroit, Michigan Welfare Rights Organization, and all the Detroit water justice organizations. So I want to thank you all for your leadership. And because of you all, I am confident in your success at standing up a statewide water affordability solution.
Thanks, Mary. That was like super inspiring. I feel like after that, yes, we're going to make this happen. So thank you so much for that insight. Andy B., similarly, I'd like to get your thoughts on the legal feasibility of implementing water affordability in Michigan. Working in this space, I've often heard that implementing a water affordability plan can be a violation of the Headley Amendment. So I wanted to get your take on what are some legal obstacles and remedies that we should prepare for as we are continuing to try to move this legislation.
Oh boy, thanks, Sarah. That's I'll try not to get into the weeds too far on this answer. So the Headley Amendment is a constitutional amendment in Michigan, passed like 40 years ago. It basically says that if you're going to impose a tax on people, then the people in the jurisdiction who are paying the tax have to have a chance to vote on it. What does this have to do with water rates? Well, there's a question which is unanswered in the amendment, and there's been some Supreme Court cases, but the question is, what's a tax and what's a fee? Is a water rate a fee or is it a tax? And there's lots of different fees that are in Michigan. There's lots of different fees that are imposed by the city of Detroit or any city. And some of those could be considered taxes and some could be considered fees depending on how they're imposed. And so it's hard to answer the kind of a one-size-fits-all answer. But in the major case that this came from is a case involving stormwater fees in Lansing, was the Bolt v. Lansing case. And there the Supreme Court said that there are three factors they look at to determine whether something is a fee or a tax. Number one, is it regulatory or is it primarily to raise revenue? If it's primarily to raise revenue, they'll consider it more to be a tax. If it's primarily regulatory, meaning if it has public benefits beyond the revenue, then it's more likely to be a fee. Second question is, how proportional is it to either the costs that of the service or the benefits that people derive from the service? If it's strictly proportional, then it's more likely to be a fee than a tax. If it's not proportional at all, then it's going to be more likely to be a tax. The third criterion is the charge, is it voluntary or not? If there's some voluntariness to it, it's not going to be a tax. Taxes are not voluntary. If there's some voluntariness, it's going to be a fee. And so those are the criteria, and those would apply to any municipal water affordability program, and they'd apply to a statewide affordability program. So we've looked at those factors as they apply to the We the People Detroit program in the proposal, and to some of the water programs around the state. And water service programs, that is providing water, not sewage, but providing water, we believe is likely in most municipalities, and certainly in the statewide legislation, it's going to be a fee and not a tax. It's not going to run into Headley. And there's three reasons. Number one, it's clearly regulatory. I mean, it's not, if you're putting in place a water affordability program, you're not doing it to raise revenue, right? So you've got that one's off the board immediately. Second is, in terms of the proportionality, there are all sorts of costs that are captured by fee charges, water rate charges, that are not strictly proportional to service. The elderly, for example, there's provisions for their water. People who can't afford to pay their water, their water bills, those bills are rolled over to the next year, and therefore other people have to pay to make that up. There's debt services. There's other things that go into the provision of water rates. So the question of proportionality is much broader than are you paying for the quantity of water you get? And so the other piece of this is that the funding piece is tied to this. Water systems don't rely strictly on rates to generate their revenue. They have other sources of funding, and the more sources of funding they have from the outside, the less they rely strictly on rates. And so if we have, as Victoria was talking about, a good external funding source, then this proportionality question won't even come up, because no one's rates will get raised because there's because of income-based rates or water affordability legislation. The third piece is, this is a sad piece. We talked before that there's no right to water in Michigan. As long as there's no right to water in Michigan, that means that cities are not obligated to provide any water to their customers. And we see this going on right now. Michigan law does not require cities to provide water to their residents. And we see this because there are plenty of people in Michigan that don't have water, that are using bottled water, that aren't paying water rates. And they've been forced to do that, but it's their legal choice not to do so. And if anybody wanted to, they could say, we're not going to pay water rates, we're going to truck our water in from someplace else. So in that respect, for now, that lack of water as a human right, as ridiculous and sad as that is, we can use that, right? We can use, okay, if water's not a human right, then guess what? This can't possibly be a tax, because there's no mandate that everybody receive water. And if you want to change that and make it a mandate for everybody to receive water, great. I love to tackle that legal problem. So the water affordability legislation that we've developed for We the People of Detroit, the We the People is pushing. Yes, it meets the legal dictates of the Headley Amendment, and it should be constitutional. It should be legal. The challenge is getting it passed. And Victoria, sure you can speak to that.
I was going to move the ball over to Victoria, Andy, but I do have to say that every time you talk, I think I feel like I understand the Headley Amendment. And then 5 minutes later, I get confused again. So I'm really happy that we have you to help us navigate all of this. And thanks to everyone. You've been with us for an hour. We are going to just wrap up this panel, move into conversation. I know there are some questions that are coming in that we're going to answer live here. So Thank you for sticking with us. Victoria, I'd like to give you the last formal word on the formal section of this panel. From your vantage point on tracking water affordability nationally, regionally, at the state level, what does sustainable and equitable water policy need to look like? And what policies are being drafted or on the table that we should be paying attention to?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. And really the simple answer is the 11-point water affordability platform, which is on both the We the People of Detroit's and Freshwater Futures websites. But in addition to that, I want to lift up a few pieces in there and add a couple things. One, and Andy was just talking about this, that it recognizes the human right to water. The second is that it makes sure that communities and its residents have clear access to any information related to their service, their utility, anything related to their water. It's also sensitive, I believe, to cumulative impacts in areas that are affected by multiple layers of environmental and social injustice, which we know is quite often the case. And the last thing I'll say is that all communities are able to enjoy equal access to the related benefits of water and water infrastructure, right? So that means it allows everyone to enjoy, to recreate in clean water. It ensures that everyone has benefits, economic benefits from those opportunities, like infrastructure jobs and contracts and training. So to get there and to answer the second part of your question, there is a lot of work in motion to address all those pieces, which Senator Chang had alluded to earlier in her video. And as Mary said, in this new political landscape that we find ourselves in Michigan, right, years of work, years that precede me, is now coming to fruition. So, and Andy mentioned this earlier already, but as We the People of Detroit continues to educate our people on this issue and our policy priorities, we are laser focused on income-based rates that consider a household's ability to pay, right? Protections from water shutoffs, and solutions for debt forgiveness. And groups across Michigan, not, other People's Water Board, other groups that Senator Chang is working with, are coming at the issue of water affordability from all angles, from transparency, accountability, right? She mentioned decriminalization of reconnection and more. So I want to just lift up a few pieces that we're looking at, and please, folks who are watching, add if there are other things that you think that we should be watching too. But at the federal level, right, recently the EPA announced their proposal for the first ever national standard on 6 PFAS substances. So we'll be watching to see where that ruling goes. We will also, if it gets enacted, right, see how that affects cost. They are taking public comment right now. I know they'll have a public hearing on May 4th as well, but I know there's more detail on their website. In Michigan, we're looking at Senate Bill 14, which is the no stricter than federal, or rather repealing the no stricter than federal, right, which was restrict state-specific rules from being more stringent than federal standards. And that was put in place, let's remind ourselves, during a time when Michigan was leading the nation in regulations on lead and water. We put forward stricter, lower maximum contaminant levels than the federal standards. And then the second is going back to what Andy B was talking about, the human right to water. As he said, we don't have a legal right to water, but Senate Bill 25 is looking to codify that, put that into law. And so we'll be making sure, we'll be watching that, but we're watching it not just so that we're declaring it a human right, but we'll be watching it to make sure that we can back that up with actually providing clean, safe, and affordable water for people like Sonia Bennett and her family. Thank you, Jamal.
Thank you, Victoria. It was really helpful for you to kind of frame it that way, pull all the pieces together that we've heard. I'm going to ask Tiana to take this question on after I hand things over, but Tiana, people can be following We the People of Detroit social media and email to keep getting updates on this, right? Maybe you can help folks know, because as Victoria, as you were talking, I was thinking there's a lot of different moving pieces, and be good to figure out how all of us can stay abreast of everything that's happening. But let me just make sure. So I think I'm supposed to let you know there's a link, audience, in the chat to what Victoria talked a little bit about before around state revolving funds. So you can see a Freshwater Future webinar related to that. What else am I supposed to say before I hand things over? I think I was just going to reflect on how full my mind is, thinking about the very specifics about how utilities can take very specific action. I'm thinking about the data that has been collected and how it needs to be used. I'm thinking about the legal strategies, and I'm thinking about the need to make sure that we center community voices, remember the people behind the data, and work with all the partners that are here in the room. So that's what I'm sitting with. And Tiana, I'm sure I forgot some things. I'm going to hand it over to you to sweep up and move us to Q&A.
Thank you. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Jumana, for moderating with me. It's been a really good time just hearing from you all about, for me, what I'm sitting with is that we've done, World Water Day events in the past. And this time I feel really inspired that we're going to make water affordability happen in Michigan. Like, the time is really right now, given the political landscape that we have and all of the, as Victoria talked about, the activity in the state legislature that is happening around water affordability and all the work that has gone into kind of leading up to this moment. So that's really where my mind is right now. Thank you so much for wrapping that up for us, Victoria, with those points, and everybody kind of pointing out that water is a human right and we all deserve access to it every day. So I would like to move us forward with some of the questions that we've seen in the chat. So there's a question from Gary Wilson. His question is, action on water affordability in Michigan advances in small increments, if at all. Senator Chang is trying to advance legislation. Governor Whitmer has essentially been silent. What will it take to speed up the process? And I want to kick that question over to Victoria.
Well, I want to lift up something that Mary Grant mentioned earlier, and that's political will. And that's bringing people in like Sonia, that's bringing in people whose voices are, often left out or tokenized, frankly, and used as dressing. But we need to support, we need to bring those voices back in, and show that those lived experiences are just the same as and strong as just as any data, any research, any report that comes out. But I think Jill may have her hand up as well. So I think Jill wants to respond as well.
Yes.
Thank you, Victoria. I agree with what you said, of course. And I just want to add that, yes, it is true that Mayor Lightfoot stopped all shutoffs at immediately. What I think is difficult to understand, though, is that it's almost, I'm not even going to say almost, it's impossible to get your water turned back on in Chicago. We worked for 2 years to try and help even an individual home get its water back on after it had been off for more than 90 days in Chicago. And so I think, not to point fingers at any one decision maker, the point is, this is really hard stuff. Our governor has been quieter than we would like her to be. But I think we as residents, we as communities, and we as groups working on this need to really stand up and talk to our legislators, our governor, and everyone around them about this human right to water, and the fact that the Great Lakes state, with 20+% of all of the fresh surface water in the world, has a black eye right now over this. And we need to move forward, and we need to do that in a big way so we can lead, rather than looking as though we're hoarding this water, even from our own residents, which is a terrible look. So Gary, I appreciate your comment. I think there are differences in different jurisdictions, but for all of us, there's a lot of work to be done. And we really look to our residents for what are the solutions we need to put forward.
Thank you, Jill. I think Andy B wanted to answer, and then Andy K.
I think Andy K, you were first. Go ahead.
Oh.
Thanks, fellow namesake. Just be quick. To me, the bottom line is that every person is entitled to safe drinking water and clean waterways at an affordable rate. You know, where a person lives or who they are should not determine whether or not they have the access to these things, or how they live, or whether they live. It's just not right. And I think that what's essential is, just as there's a low-income household energy assistance program, there also needs to be a low-income household water assistance program, a national, there's a LIHEAP program for energy. There needs to be a national LIWAC program for water. And if that was in place where everyone was only paying an affordable rate, that would also free up utilities to deal with infrastructure challenges and provide the services at an affordable rate, because they would know that the low-income households would have the safety net and only be required to pay what they could afford. And it's not a blue. I'm not naive. I recognize there's a big divide in our country, but this is not a blue state or red state issue. It is not a rural or urban issue. There are poor people and low-income people in every part of the country and every type of community. This is just this national imperative. Thank you.
And I'll jump in now. I agree with all that's been said, and it's been you all said it so well. I just want to raise one other point. When we talk about lack of investment, Jill, you made a great point about how the federal investments decline, the state's investments decline, but there's also been active disinvestment, and I think we have to call that out. There's been active disinvestment in Detroit, in Benton Harbor, in Flint, Pontiac, over decades. And that disinvestment continues to this day to a large extent for a lot of those communities. And then you couple that with the fact that for years, there were emergency managers in place in those cities that deprived those citizens in those cities of even the right to manage their own systems, their own water, their own finances. And Michigan is fallen way farther behind than other states because of those economic disinvestment, which is essentially systemic racism. And then also the systemic racism that brought in the disenfranchisement of the people in the cities that were the most victims of the disinvestment in the first place. So when you look at that, Chicago's different. Many of the Midwestern cities are different than the Michigan cities. And so we have farther to go to catch up. And the great thing is that I believe that there's huge momentum now behind water affordability and really major changes in water affordability in the state, from Senator Chang to many other legislatures. This is the first time in decades or over a decade that there's been a change in party in the Michigan legislature, so the Michigan legislature can do something, and that's driving it. And we're also at a point where some of these cities have escaped their emergency managers, and you have some city leadership now that is listening and pushing forward. The Detroit Lifeline Plan would have been impossible 2 or 3 years ago, and look where that has gone. And it's so anyway. It's just, there's a lot of hope. There's a huge momentum here, but let's also recognize the systemic racism and the disinvestment and accompanying it that has put Michigan cities in the hole that they're in now.
Thank you. Victoria?
Yeah, I just want to definitely +1 everything Andy just said. But also I just want to mention one quick thing, right? That in a world where kitchen table issues are everything, water affordability is and has to be seen as that way too. That is something that is going to push people, that is going to spur and maintain consistent conversation around it, and the urgency that we need to be talking about it with. But I'll stop there and let others questions come through.
Thank you. I will move this question over to Andy B. The question is there a clear set of talking points that break down why water affordability does not violate the Headley Amendment accessible?
We don't have a clear set of talking points for that yet, but that's a great suggestion. We should do one. We should put one together, and we will. The University of Michigan Environmental Law Clinic and Sustainability Clinic is working on this issue hard now. I'll put that before them, and then we'll run it by the communications specialists at We the People Detroit and Freshwater Future to make sure that that the lawyers don't clutter up too much. But yeah, we need some simple talking points. You're absolutely right. Thanks for that question.
Thank you. And thank you again to our panelists for participating today. Your work and dedication to making sure that water is accessible for all is beyond commendable. We're so grateful to have you participate on World Water Day. Before we leave, we do want to allow everyone to hear from our distinguished water justice advocate and Congresswoman, Rashida Tlaib. So we are going to move on to that. I'm going to share my screen again. And also, thank you so much, Jumana, for moderating with me. This was fun. Okay.
Hey everyone, it's Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. I am here at the U.S. Capitol, making sure that water is a human right in our country and around the world. Not only on World Water Day, but every single day. As you all know, I come from the most beautiful, blackest city in the country, the city of Detroit, where we saw so many of our neighbors get their water cut off. It is a right to make sure that people have access to water, which is life. And so just know that you will always have a champion in the United States Congress, not only to make sure that we have funding to pay the rearage and those that cannot afford access because it's increased by 400% to access water, but also to make sure that it is safe, clean water for our children, for our families across the globe. So thank you all so much. And again, I'm your partner, fighter in the United States Congress to make sure water is a human right. Hey everyone, it's Congresswoman.
Again, thank you all so much for joining us today. As you can see on the slide, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib is fighting to get the low-income housing water assistance program, also known as LIWAP, extended, which makes this program makes federal funds available for programs like the Detroit Lifeline and other water assistance programs to support those in need. To support this initiative, you can go to the link on the screen or use the QR code to sign on to the Congresswoman's letter asking for a program extension. Taylor will also put the links to both in the chat. Also, if you have not yet signed the We the People of Detroit and also Freshwater Future Water Affordability Pledge, you can do so on our website. When you sign the pledge, you will also be signing up to get updates from the We the People of Detroit team on upcoming events and updates on what we're working on. We also encourage you to attend the Board of Water Commissioners meetings every third Wednesday each month. It's a great way to make your voice heard and let Detroit policymakers know that we demand a long-term, fully funded water affordability plan. And lastly, if you have a unique perspective and would like to be published, please reach out to me. My information is on the screen now, and we can work together on a strategy to get your story told. And also, thank you so much for your continued support. Narelle, if you want to join me on the screen and offer some last words.
Thank you, Tiana. I just want to say that we stand together in this moment on the shoulders of those water warriors who came before us, both elders and ancestors, lifted up by over 25 years of work, expertise, genius, and brilliance. Securing the human right to water is something that I know we will do in our lifetime. And we've never been more close than we are now. Second-class citizenship has never been desirable to me. So like Tiana said, take the pledge. On that site, you'll find the must-haves of water affordability that was created by community. From there, you'll be looped into everything that's going on, all engagements and more information. And like the water warrior Monica Lewis Patrick always says, deputize yourself. Quoting, of course, the Honorable Joanne Watson. No one's coming to save us. We must save ourselves. And with that, I'll turn it over to the water warrior herself.
Wow. Wow. We knew it was going to be powerful. We planned for this. We were looking forward to having all of you with us. As was stated, it's been a powerful gathering of information, a definite moment of celebration, we believe, because of all the hard work, because of all the brilliance and genius in our city, all across our state and across our nation. The moment is now for water affordability to be achieved. And I just can't say enough about the team at We the People of Detroit. We're so grateful for the leadership of Tiana Starks, of Noriel Hemphill, of the great Cecily McClellan. We also appreciate Jamana Vassie. And then, of course, Victoria Loon, Taylor Pine, and all of the board members, the volunteers, and then all of our illustrious panelists. You did a phenomenal job of ushering in a lot of information, but also some action items, some things that we all can do to move water affordability for all of us. Thank you so much and have a wonderful night, and let's get it done.